Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce. I'm happy to bring you a new episode of this podcast, which is part of my desire to bring you the highest quality, cutting-edge conversations, content, information to improve your health, your well-being, your connections, in service of creating the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. To quote the memorable phrase from the writer Charles Eisenstein, I work here as a trauma-informed therapist, a meditation teacher, offering psychedelic-assisted therapy, couples work, and more. You can learn about these offerings at my website, astateofmindcounseling.org. My website is currently in the process of getting updated, so bear with me there. I also play guitar and make music. You can find that at the SoundCloud link below. And I've been creating a series of short videos I've been sharing to Instagram, so I'm going to link my Instagram account below as well. If you're finding value from this podcast, please support us by donating at Patreon or by giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Another great way to support this podcast is by sharing it with friends or sharing about it on your own social media account. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Dori Lewis. Dori has been a fellow therapist for over 10 years. She's the co-founder of Elemental Psychedelics, which is a woman-led training center for education, experience, and ethics in psychedelic practice. The other co-founder of that is Dr. Shannon Hughes, who is also featured on this podcast in episode number 109, so please check that out as well if you're interested. Dori is a leader in this emerging terrain of psychedelic-assisted therapy, and she's also an innovator. And I super appreciated our conversation. I really appreciated the ease and the depth that we got to. Anyone interested in health, well-being, especially mental health, and how psychedelic medicine, such as MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin, can help, and who's interested in learning more about the scientific studies, especially those done by the MAPS organization, will find much value in this episode. I've listed some of the topics we cover below. I don't know if I got all of them, but check that out for the topics. They're listed in chronological order in the show notes below. And without further ado, I bring you Dori Lewis. Here today with Dori Lewis. Dori, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Julian, for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk to you. I know you from the therapy world, also from an authentic relating dinner that we had at my house. It was really sweet to have you there.
Yeah, I like those events. They're really, I don't know, they're a nice break for us to really just slow down and connect. So I'm glad to have met you in that space.
Yeah, me too. And how would you introduce yourself, describe what you do? I know you're a therapist and all that, but you're doing a lot more than that. So,
yeah, that's a funny question because often when I'm in spaces, I'm asked that and I don't always know what to say. I think one of the things I say is I wear many hats. I would say, I'm a teacher and a therapist and a speaker and a leader in some ways. So those are some of the titles that I currently go by. And I'm also always open to the evolution of those titles because they've changed so much. I'm also a business owner and a facilitator. And I don't use the word guide. Doesn't really align for me, but I do use the word facilitator, space holder, custodian.
Custodian, okay. Yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting question. And a lot of people in the spiritual wellness coaching kind of space, like, a lot of people, they might say, oh, I could call what I do coaching, but I don't like that word. And so the languaging can be interesting. But I like how you own like leadership, and you are a leader and business owner too. And that's a part of, for many of us being in the mental health wellness space or a therapist, there's that component of you're an entrepreneur too. If you're running your own business, you're a business owner. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I run a private practice and I have about 4 therapists who work with me and I do lead them. I'm, facilitating the meetings, I'm leading the practice, I have created the vision. So in that way, I think it pretty well aligns with what I do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and while we're on that topic, have you found, like, in terms of you creating that practice with other therapists, like, there is a certain vision, a certain, obviously, style and flavor and model. Do you want to speak to that? Because it's not just about hiring anyone with a master's in counseling, right? It's
Yeah. I mean, everybody who works for me is an independent contractor, so they're not employees, which gives them the freedom to practice the way they want. And I really believe in them having their autonomy to practice the way they want. Otherwise, then it doesn't feel authentic for them to connect with their clients to me. So I don't really do a lot of controlling over how they work as clinicians, their modalities, things like that, or even how they want to do their consult calls or how they want to create their schedule. I don't really get too involved in that. I believe in them each kind of creating their own schedule and work life that fits for them.
hmm,
The only things that I really have looked for in people who work for me and hoping that they align is that they see therapy as a tool and that they see psychedelic work as a tool, but
hmm,
that ultimately the therapeutic relationship is the thing that we're focusing on primarily with our clients is building connection
hmm,
and helping people heal through relationship. And regardless of what tools we use to develop that sense of connection and trust in relationship, that's really what I look for with people who come and join my practice is people who really believe in the healing power of connection and relationship. So that's something that's pretty paramount to my practice, as well as people that are somewhat interested or curious about the spiritual component of psychedelic work and the meaning the spiritual doors or the existential themes that might arise for a client when they begin to explore the realms of psychedelic healing, and that they at least just have some ability to connect with people, even if it's connecting around a more pragmatic view of that space from a maybe even a agnostic perspective. It's not necessarily the importance of having the same beliefs, but rather just being able to explore those realms with curiosity and openness. So
hmm.
that's also something I look for with people who join my practice, and obviously somebody who wants to be part of a team and who sees the benefit of working, for someone, because therapists can go into private practice if they want. That's not difficult. It's really looking for somebody who has decided for whatever reason that being in private practice is not for them
Hmm.
and by themselves, and that they want some kind of community aspect to their work.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate all that, and it is interesting. A lot of therapists in private practice can feel isolated, which is ironic, given that we are trying to help people not be isolated, you know. But it can be, yeah. That's good. I love the team aspect and all that. Well, beautiful. Well, do you want to just share with us a bit about your journey, your life story, what feels helpful to share? I mean, at some point in time, you decided to get into mental health and become a therapist, and there's often some reason or reasons or some inspiration there.
Yeah. I mean, I won't tell my whole life story, but I will share a little bit about kind of how I got into this work. And when I was about 5, I was at the time we didn't have the term neurodivergence, or maybe we did, but it wasn't being used in the way that it is now. So I was, it was more of the term learning disability.
Hmm.
And I was diagnosed with a learning disability when I was about 5. And I was having a hard time in school with learning. And in the first grade, I left my current school and went to a special school that taught a specific method called the Orton-Gillingham method. But in that transition, it was a difficult transition for me, leaving one school and going to another. And so during that time, my parents connected me with a therapist and got me into therapy because I was feeling a lot of feelings of shame around not being intelligent, feeling like there was something wrong with me. So I had some emotional stuff going on, and I went to see a therapist as a child, about
Hmm.
5 or 6.
Wow,
And
that's a young age.
yeah, yeah. And I loved it. I loved going to see my therapist. I
Hmm.
associated that time with positive connection and play and ice cream because she would take me to get ice cream.
Yeah.
Not every time, but I would say like maybe every other time we would walk down and go get ice cream together and play games. And I just had a really positive experience in therapy and decided to continue for most of my childhood. So it was really early on that I knew that I wanted to be a therapist because I wanted to be like my therapist, Susan. She was just
Mm,
such a ray of light in my life. And it was somebody that it was just for me. It was, I had a sister, and growing up, my family was busy and we were always going to play sports, and we were, there was just a lot of activity. It was really nice to just have a place that was just for me, where this person and I were focused on, yeah, just me.
mm,
So that was really positive. And I would say because it started at such a young age, it almost felt like an inner calling as I got older to be in that role, to just want to be a therapist. I think I knew since I was
mm.
pretty young.
Wow.
And then I took a high school class my senior year, and we learned all about Freud, and it was awesome. My teacher was Mr. Steele, and I loved him, and he was just really passionate about teaching about psychology. And then I just knew that I was going to go into college and study psych. So I pretty much started as a wee child, knowing that I wanted to do this.
That's amazing. Okay. Your story reminds me a little bit of I had Craig Salerno on the podcast, and he was also like from a young age somehow was just on this track. That's great. Well,
Yeah.
it's good that you had. I love hearing that there was some psychology class in high school. I had nothing like that, and it seems like so obvious that learning about psychology and our nervous system and relationships and communication, why isn't that taught in, I don't know, fifth grade and eighth grade and 10th grade? And even if it was just a few hours of, it would help a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, it was the first time that they had offered it, and I was lucky
Mm.
enough to take it. So I think that was also a really positive experience. And it just
Yeah.
continued to be. My undergraduate program was really positive as well. Graduate school, I had a really good educational experience in my development as a therapist.
And you went to Columbia in New York City?
Yeah, I got my master's, a dual master's at Columbia.
That's great.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. And then maybe while we're on that note, what role, could you just speak briefly to psychoeducation? Like sometimes in my work as a therapist, learning about our nervous system, learning about communication, learning about how our emotions work is often a big part of it. And then that's something that the person can take away and use, hopefully, for the rest of their life. I think that's, a big part of what a lot of therapists can offer people, right?
Yeah, I always say, like, I don't know if we would have a job if people learn this stuff, like you said, early in school, because so much of what we're doing is just teaching people about emotions, relationships, sometimes biology, neurology. We're constantly teaching. I would say that's a huge part of what we do at teaching people skills, meditation skills, journaling skills, practices. So much of what we do is basic. I think we are emotional and relational teachers
Mm,
in so
yeah.
much of what we do. I use so many books in my work. It's very much like coming to a class about you and learning how to apply these skills and these theories to you as a person. I mean, that's what I learned in my therapy. I'm still in therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Yeah. I love that. For me, it can be a big shift in perspective if someone comes in, they have a lot of problems or issues or things, usually when someone comes to therapy, it's because something isn't working very well. But the shift in perspective of like, can you take what's happening and what can you learn from it? And it's part of this path of learning and growth versus evidence that you're messed up or things are hopeless, right? That's such a big shift in perspective.
Yeah, and I go to therapy at the healthiest times in my life. I mean, currently I feel really internally supported with my practices and relationships and family, but I still go to therapy because it's still helpful. It's still helpful
Mm,
for me to keep processing things that do come up day to day, and to have somebody to talk with and to have this ongoing relationship. And it also helps to have that because when inevitably, because life is a roller coaster, shit hits the fan, which it will, I
mm,
have this built relationship with somebody that I trust, that we've already been doing this work. And I can just use that space that's already there rather than having to establish a relationship during a time of crisis. So I
Mm.
find, having it, even though I go at this point maybe every 3 or 4 weeks, I find it to be super supportive for me uh, in a long-term way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I've experienced this myself, and I've seen it with other people where maybe your therapist retires or moves away, or for some reason that has to end. And then it can be hard to, yeah, create that new relationship and go through all that again. And then you could put it off. But then, like you say, if you wait until a time of crisis, that might not be the best strategy.
Yes, and I had the experience of I moved to Colorado in 2016 and I started with a therapist here and it was okay. I did it for like a year. It just didn't feel like the right fit. And I spent probably a year or two shopping for a therapist because it can take time. It's like dating. You need to find somebody who's a good fit. And that's not always going to be the first date. And I think people easily, like, they
Mm.
get easily dissuaded from continuing to seek the right therapist when they've had one or two not so great experiences. But just, hopefully for anybody who's listening to know that it's okay to need to try on a few different therapists. I had probably 3 or 4 in a 2-year period where I was doing one. I would try to give myself at least 3 sessions to just see how it felt. If it was really not a good fit, then I wouldn't push myself to do that many more. So I would say that if anyone's listening who's feeling like it's hard to find a therapist, it can be. And I think it's totally worthwhile because my current therapist and I have been working together for 3 years, and I'm so grateful that I have this relationship available to me. But it did take some time to find, and I want to normalize that.
Mm. Thank you. That's really good advice, I think. And it's so true. And it can be hard. There can be a lot of roadblocks to find that a good person. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I think that normalizes it for people. It took a year to find someone that felt like really the right person for you. And yeah,
Almost 2 years. Yeah.
almost, yeah.
And I took some breaks because I had some moments where I kind of wanted to feel like giving up, but ultimately I'm really glad that I did find my therapist. And she's probably going to retire in the next few years, so I'm really
Mm.
hoping that she doesn't.
Huh? Well, any advice for someone in that process of looking for a therapist?
Just give it time and be willing to recognize when something doesn't feel right. Just because someone's a therapist doesn't mean they're right for you. And I say this to people who come to see me often is we're getting to know each other. And if this doesn't feel like a good fit for us, I'll give you other referrals and I won't take it personally. You shouldn't keep seeing somebody that doesn't feel good for you. And I don't think a good therapist or really many therapists are going to be that disappointed if you choose not to continue to see them. At least that's not an appropriate response. Like when people don't see me or after a few sessions, I'm like, good, go, here's some names because I want this person to find the right fit and I might not be it. So, yeah, I think I encourage people to be selective about who
Yeah.
they talk to because
Yeah.
hopefully they spend time really sharing things that they might not share with anybody else, even partners and spouses and family, especially partners and spouses and family.
Yeah. Yeah. And to normalize that too, that you don't have to say everything to a family member or a spouse. And it can be wise to make that really conscious and sometimes take care with what you share and how you share it. And having someone to talk that through could be really helpful.
Yeah. Yes. And also being careful about, not I build trust with therapists before I share my deepest, darkest secrets. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
just because someone's a therapist doesn't mean you want to necessarily tell them everything right off the bat because you haven't built or developed that trust and vulnerability should happen in time and
Mm.
trust needs to be developed. So I often tell clients, I want to hear your story in your first few sessions, but don't tell me your deepest, darkest traumas or pains right now. I want
Mm.
us to build trust and I want you to tell me that once you really feel safe with me, not just
Mm.
because I'm wearing this hat as a therapist, but because you feel like your nervous system is able to feel safe enough with me to share some of these most vulnerable parts of your story. So I actually urge clients in the beginning, like, you can tell me a bird's eye view. I want to know general things, but I don't actually need to know the deepest, darkest secrets of your experience at this point. It's too soon.
Yeah, that's great advice. Do you ever find yourself pausing a client and saying and
Yeah,
reminding them of this? That's beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
Well, here's a question I can ask a fellow therapist that's maybe a little more edgy. Have you ever, or how often does it come up where you say to the person you're working with, "Hey, I'm actually not a good fit for you"? Because I think that's a really hard conversation to have as a therapist potentially.
Yeah, I have. I can't say how many. I mean, I've been a therapist for about 11 years, but I spent the first 4 years in community mental health. And so in the last, I don't know, I guess yeah, 6 years I've been in private practice, 4 years in community mental health. I have definitely told a number of clients that I didn't think I was a good fit and that I was going to give them referrals elsewhere. And I really tried to sandwich that between this isn't about you. This isn't that I don't want to work with you.
Mm.
It is my ethical responsibility to know that, or no, to believe that I can help you, that I have the skills and the tools to be able to support and help you. And if I don't think that I can or do, that's unethical for me to continue to see you because this is either outside of my scope of practice, that I have my own stuff coming up that I need to work through with a supervisor or a therapist, that I'm not able to really truly connect or see you in the way that I need to be able to in order to help you. Um, or that I think that our relational dynamic is not going to result in the highest potential for your healing. And to be able to say that to someone, that it's not personal, and that I will help them every step of the way to find someone else who might be a better fit.
That's so well said. Yeah, that's an important part, and it shouldn't be a bad thing, but it can often bring stuff up, obviously. So,
And I'm willing to work with clients around that, to
mm.
be like, okay, let's talk about what's coming up, and let's do a little exploration around that. And I think what we can do as therapists is that we can teach people how to have healthy endings.
Yes, how beautiful. Yeah,
And that I don't think people have a lot of experience with in the world.
yeah. Could you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, oftentimes endings are either like negative, like a breakup,
Hmm.
I don't love you anymore, I don't want to be with you anymore. A job ending, you get fired,
Right.
or there's layoffs, even though it's not personal, or people die and there's loss. We just so rarely have, or relationships, friendships end, and we don't know
Mm.
why, or why that person stopped calling us, and there's confusion. So there's so few opportunities for us to have well-paced, anticipated endings that are more like closures, that allow us to leave relationships with a sense of like having autonomy in how that closing got to end
Hmm.
and that ending got to happen, and it being expected in some way, and having a an official end to something that gives some maybe ritual or ceremony. I mean, I've had
Mm.
sessions with clients where they've graduated, like they don't need to be in therapy anymore.
Mm.
And we both know it, but they're like, but I don't want to lose you. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, let's practice what it means like to have grief and loss, but also have a celebration of that ending.
Mm.
And
Beautiful.
I've brought in cupcakes, and we've brought in, we've had sessions where I'm like, I'm going to wear sweatpants today, like, cause it makes it feel a little different. And,
Mm.
we'll switch chairs and we'll just kind of talk and have like something that changes it up, that marks this as a different type of thing, and makes it fun, and also honors closure.
I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Great. Well, then, yeah, the other thing I wanted to get into with you is around your work with psychedelic therapy and all of that. And do you want to share what led to your interest in that field? And I think that's where I really
Yeah.
see you as a leader in the way that I know you, at least. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Where do I start? I was a personal use teenager, just exploring the expanse of my mind from an early age. And I was about 15 when I had my first psychedelic experience. And I really didn't know how to make sense of a lot of the things that I was experiencing as a teenager,
Hmm.
because it
Do you,
was
do
still
you,
pretty, yeah.
do you feel comfortable sharing what you took at that age or what that was like?
I took salvia, smoked
Okay.
salvia, and then I took mushrooms about a year later for the first time. But the salvia trip was, I mean, I was smoking weed earlier, but I didn't experience that as psychedelic when I was young. I was about
Hmm.
13 when I smoked for the first time, but I didn't find that to be psychedelic, although I think there were times that I did have somewhat psychedelic experiences. I really don't consider that my first psychedelic experience. My first psychedelic experience was on salvia,
Hmm.
and it was really bizarre. I tell this story sometimes when I'm teaching trainings. I smoked this salvia. I was at my high school baseball field with some friends at night,
Hmm.
and the pitcher's mound became an anthill. And then I became an ant, and I lived an entire consciousness as an ant in a hive
Wow.
mind, and had an ego dissolution. Didn't was no like there was no self, there was no Dory. It was just um, this black ant that was in this community, and it's hard to explain because the consciousness of that was not very much like a human consciousness. It was
Hmm.
very different.
Amazing.
Um, and I went through this entire life, and then I came out and had take a few moments to feel my body and to remember who I was, because I didn't remember that, like, the entire identity of myself
Hmm.
or my story or my history or my name. So it took me a few seconds, if not maybe a minute or two, to like acknowledge that I was that was not happening anymore.
That's an amazing story. I've always wondered what it would be like to be an ant or a bee, but I haven't had that experience. But yeah,
It's
do you
hard
think
to
there was
describe.
was there when I hear a story like that? I'm guessing there was a degree of safety you felt there with your friends at night in the baseball field, or not. I mean, that's an intense experience you're describing. So
Yeah,
you
no,
weren't in.
I wouldn't say I felt this huge amount of safety. I mean, I was friends with my friends for a long time. I guess I felt safe enough with them. I don't remember particularly assessing safety. And I say this, I've said this before. I've been a bit of a risk taker in my psychedelic use, and most of my life, really. I am somebody who is a different type of adrenaline junkie. I'm not like I don't want to, rock climb and maybe kill myself in that way, but I have been quite risk taking in other aspects of my life, specifically with my psychedelic exploration at a young age. And I wouldn't say that assessing safety or setting was always top of mind when I was
Mm,
using psychedelics in my teen and early 20s.
mm,
So,
yeah.
well, and that actually kind of leads me to kind of how I got into the work. So I was using psychedelics recreationally from 15 to, you know, still sometimes. um, and I would say, oh, now I don't really use it recreationally too much, but um, I came out to Colorado. I had some really big psychedelic experiences that were personal, but again, it wasn't really happening in the professional space. And then I had a client that was really severely depressed. We had exhausted medication. We were really at a place where this person was actively considering suicide, and I didn't really know what else to do. And another client of mine who I had been seeing had done ketamine, an infusion, and had been telling me about it. And I thought, maybe I'll try this with this other client. I wonder how I reach out to the people that had helped this other person.
Mm,
So I reached out to Dr. Scott Shannon, who had been doing the IV sessions with this other person, and asked if I could refer my current client to see him. So we started to work together on that case and do case consults, as he did the IV ketamine and I would do the integration. And I shared that I had done psychedelics before. I had done ketamine recreationally before. It wasn't new to me. I had, been in K-holes and done
mm,
ketamine. So it wasn't a foreign concept to me. And this client did really well, and I was really a positive experience seeing this person go from pretty actively suicidal to, being able to function more. And that was a fascinating experience. And then from there, Scott invited me to come to the first training that his group was doing. And so I was invited to go to that first training,
Hmm.
and I went. And then I started to use ketamine in my practice very slowly. And I never advertised it at the time. I didn't say, like,
Hmm.
I'm a ketamine therapist. It was more like, oh, great, I have this new tool, just like I would with any other tool that I learned as a therapist. And I'm going to use it with the clients that it feels like it would be a good fit for. So I had clients in my practice who I knew would already be a good fit for ketamine. So I just kind of rolled that treatment into their existing care, and was seeing great results. And then about 6 months later, somebody reached out to me from the training that I had been to, and they said, we've heard that you're doing really good work with your clients. We know word's getting around that you're a pretty good ketamine therapist. We'd like for you to come and teach at
Oh, wow.
our training. So
Beautiful.
they asked me to teach on set and setting,
Oh, yeah.
and I brought in a lot of my personal use history of what not such a good set and setting can do, and how, having really good containers and rituals and ceremonies around psychedelic use were really what made my psychedelic personal work change, because I had gone from recreational use in teen years to more ceremonial and intentional use in my late 20s, and I had personally experienced how that shift had helped my experiences become much more healing rather than confusing or chaotic. And so that's what I taught on.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Do you remember what year you first got into the ketamine therapy?
It was our 2019, right before the
Okay.
pandemic. We
Yeah.
did our training in January of 2019. That was my training.
Amazing. Well, I think that story you just shared of someone who's actively suicidal, ketamine therapy helping them stop, not be suicidal, get over depression. Stories like that really, I think, speak to pretty much everyone. Like, obviously, I don't know if I can say everyone, but 99.99% of people don't want anyone to commit suicide. And if a treatment like that can help them, then why not? And I think that's why we're at the moment we're having with psychedelic medicine being seen as a medicine and becoming legal and so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a blog about this, but the ketamine is not going anywhere in my practice, even when, mushrooms and MDMA are available. Like, I'm not going to stop doing ketamine work, because ketamine works really well for certain types of depression, like way better than any other medicine. So I'm always giving a plug for ketamine, that, like, it will always have a place in the psychedelic menu, so to speak, of treatment. And I really don't want it to be overlooked, especially because of, some of the negative press that ketamine gets. I know that Matthew Perry, who passed away, and
Oh, yeah.
um, yeah, and that got some really bad press. And then just other negative things that have happened in the media with ketamine. I think that it's imperative that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in that ketamine is really effective for depression in a way that a lot of other psychedelics aren't. And also using ketamine part of a larger treatment plan with other psychedelics, or as a beginning step before doing more psychedelics, is incredibly helpful in this work. So we can go into that if you want, but I will just say that I don't think ketamine should be disregarded or discarded because
Mm,
mushrooms are going to be coming on the scene. It is an
yeah.
imperative tool, especially in working with other medicines.
Interesting. No, I really appreciate that. That's a really good point. I think, and I've spoken to this on the podcast before. There are shadow sides. There are dark sides.
Yeah.
Ketamine is something that can be abused. And I actually had a friend who um, was a business person, and he was creating a company around kind of biohacking kind of stuff. And he unfortunately passed away. Maybe I could just share that story. I mean, he died in one of those float tanks, which is unusual. And the police found ketamine in his pocket. I don't know if they ever did the full autopsy, but it was kind of presumed that he took ketamine. He was there at like 3 a.m. There was no one else there, so obviously you want to be very careful. And that's
Yeah.
not recommend getting in a float tank, but you got to be careful. You got to be smart. And
Well, and
yeah,
thank you for speaking to that. I think when I say ketamine, I'm also talking about ketamine assisted psychotherapy.
good. Yeah.
I'm not talking about going and getting, and I even like that includes like getting a prescription from Mind Bloom. Like I don't really think that that model is so great either. Because you're not monitored by a person who's in person with you. There's someone virtually, but you can easily just end that call. And then you have this ketamine that, and they also tend to give people a lot of ketamine, but
Mm,
I think that the safest way to use ketamine for the treatment of depression is in ketamine assisted psychotherapy or getting an IV infusion and using a therapist like immediately after and
mm,
basically using a psychotherapist to support your experience. But having somebody there, absolutely, not doing these drugs alone in the privacy of your own home. I mean, there are reasons and ways that I think these virtual experiences can be beneficial for people who aren't able to access spaces where they can go sit with a ketamine assisted psychotherapist. And for access purposes, I get it. And I think that everyone should have, as much access to this care as anyone else, regardless of where you live geographically.
mm.
And best practice is working with a therapist who's trained in how to work with ketamine, who understands ketamine assisted psychotherapy, how to use it within a therapeutic context, and how to support somebody in not developing unhealthy relationship with that medicine. And
Yeah.
that's going to be a psychotherapist who's trained, or a psychiatrist who's trained, or a nurse practitioner who's trained. But definitely not just ketamine in general, but ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And that's really what I'm talking about. So thank you for helping
Yeah.
me be
No, it's
more
a
clear on that.
yeah, that's a great point. It's so important. I think it's a great message to share. And yeah, I mean, and then you mentioned getting a ketamine infusion at a clinic, which in my understanding tends to be it's a very intense experience, right? It's like, and then
Yeah,
seeing a
it's very
therapist right
intense to do an
after.
IV.
How would you how would you advise someone if they were working with a therapist? Would you advise like a therapy session the next day, or even the same day, or?
Yeah, so I did that in the beginning with some of my clients before we were doing lozenges. And what it looked like with my client was that we would do prep sessions together, talking about how his intention, what he wants to get out of it, asking for help when he needs it, and when he's, in the chair or whatever. And then I wasn't there. He would go to the clinic, he would get the IV, and then he would get a ride, like his driver would then drive him over to my practice.
Oh, right
um,
after.
he would not immediately, like he would have some time to chill and, get his bearings. And then he would come to my practice probably an hour, maybe two later, and we would do a session. It's not
Amazing.
ideal. Ideally, the therapist is there with you, but it worked. And he was privileged enough to be able to get a ride over. Sometimes he
Mm,
did take a ride share. And then we would do a therapy session and we would process and talk about his experience. And then his ride would pick him up and he would go home.
I love that. I think that sounds so powerful to me because you're working with a therapist that same day, and
Mhm.
even it's just that like it's so easy for our habitual mind to come back and our old patterns and to forget something. It's almost like having a dream when you wake up. Like, oh, that was an amazing dream, and then you're having breakfast and you're like, I can't remember what happened,
Yeah.
but something happened.
Yeah.
So it can be like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's great to have your therapist there when you come out immediately. They can document things, they can help you make, just say everything that happened and just kind of let it go. And then they can write the whole thing down, which is what I do when I do ketamine sessions with oral lozenges. Clients will come out and they'll just start to, verbally kind of vomit their whole journey. And I'm just there writing everything down, just scribing. And then we use that in the follow-up sessions to support them because then they're like, oh, I don't remember that. And I'm like, well, actually, when you came out, you said this thing. I was like, oh yeah, wow, I
Mm,
didn't even recall that. So I think, yes, you're right. I think having support, that psychedelic therapy should be done with support. I mean,
mm.
that's what we do. That's what I do. That's what I teach therapists to do.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Good. Do you want to you're mentioning, I mean, ketamine's so known now for treating depression, and you shared about that. Anything to share about certain issues that you would recommend ketamine for, and certain issues you might not?
I mean, Dr. Craig Heacock is the greatest to talk about this, but I think I find that ketamine is really good for people who have that type of depression, like seasonal affective disorder, really low motivation. They're sleeping a lot. they're in like mental kind of loops that are really difficult to get out of, negative thought cycles, not necessarily as deep as OCD, but enough that they're kind of ruminating. Really that kind of low energy, that lethargic, low motivation, depression, ketamine seems to do really, really well with. But the thing that I want to say about depression is that depression is a symptom cluster. It's not actually, in my opinion, it's not a diagnosis in its of itself. I mean, it is in the DSM,
Hmm.
but sometimes depression is a symptom of something else. Often it is, I believe. Not always. There's a percentage of people that there is a chemical imbalance, and I do believe that medication and ketamine treatments just like really help those people kind of move out of it. And I believe that. And I also think there are people where attachment trauma is showing up in ways that look like depression, or um, existential worries, stress around life, around
Hmm.
big questions, or feeling disconnected from tribe and from community, which
Hmm.
is something that a lot of people struggle with in our time, is not having a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, and feeling like unanchored and lost in this abyss of what is life? What is the point? What am I supposed to do? Who am I? Those bigger questions can often consciously or unconsciously breed feelings of depression. And that is when those questions, those bigger existential questions come up, and that's what's leading to depression, then I think mushrooms are a really good treatment.
Oh,
And I think
interesting. Yeah.
ketamine can be too. I think ketamine can also be helpful, but ultimately, I think mushrooms will be more helpful in those bigger existential questions. But I still think doing ketamine to help manage the symptoms related to
Hmm.
that, and then helping someone get more grounded and more stable, and then to go into exploring those deeper themes in mushroom journeys. And I say mushroom journeys, not mushroom journey, because
Hmm.
it takes, I don't believe that you do one journey with mushrooms or with ketamine and like you're good. It's the same thing with MDMA that we found in the study, is like we do three. When I'm a therapist, I was a therapist on the crossover study for MAPS, and I got to, have a client, and yeah, like the 3 sessions were great. This person probably could have used 5 to 7. So that's the same with mushrooms. It's the same with ketamine. We do 6 to 8 sessions in a ketamine series, sometimes 10, sometimes 4. With mushrooms, there are people that, I worked with for years that have done many mushroom sessions. And it's not as though we do one and you just change your mind. You do one and you uncover layers of the onion and more questions and more things to kind of work on and bring into your life, and then you kind of keep sitting with these medicines. This is my experience. I mean, I do facilitated journeys myself with my own teachers and my own helpers, on a yearly basis. And it's not as though just because I've had some life-changing journeys with some of the greatest medicines, ayahuasca, 5-MeO, just because I've had massive life-changing experiences on those doesn't mean that I no longer need to sit with medicine or want to sit with medicine to keep exploring new layers and levels of myself and my healing path.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's really well said. Yeah, and you mentioned depression as a symptom cluster, that instead of just looking at it like one thing, like either depressed or not, it's like why and what's going on here. And there's so many different things. And I think I'm saying his name right. Johan Harari wrote this book, Lost Connections. He does it's such a great book to look at isolation, alienation, the sense of not belonging, and how that's in our society. And that's a passion of mine. That's part of why I was hosting that authentic relating dinner, like we mentioned at the beginning, and ways to build more community and connection. Um, that's great. Well, in terms of recommending multiple journeys, like in the map study, like how spaced out are these? Because we know that we don't want to take MDMA too often.
Yeah, I think it was like a 6-month period and we did 3 sessions, maybe even we had to do a really short one with our client because this person had some life circumstances that required that they do their three pretty close together, but not that close. I mean, it was like months apart. So yeah, I think it's like minimum 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks in between that we try to
Okay.
wait.
Amazing. Do you want to just share a bit about that MAP study? So, that Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science that's really spearheaded, particularly MDMA, but all psychedelics becoming legal medicines for mental health. And
Yeah,
you were one of the people with that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm really fortunate and privileged to have been able to not only get into the MAPS training, which was I did in 2019. 2019 also, I think, 2019, 2020. It was during the pandemic, so it was online, but I knew that I just like needed to get that piece. So I got the first piece, which is a 6 month training. And then I was lucky enough again to really, I mean, it sucks, but there was a lot of like, who do you know? Do you know the right people? Can you get into the study? I mean, for me,
Mm.
that's how it was. I knew I had connections with people that were at a site. And when it came down to needing a therapist for the crossover study, which was folks who were in phase 3 who had not gotten the medicine because they were the placebo folks, they were promised an opportunity to get the medicine.
Uh,
So I got to be in that part of the study where we were giving the medicine to the people who had been placeboed.
oh, okay. And that's
Phase
part of the
3.
ethical guidelines of that kind of
Yes,
research.
exactly.
Cool.
So they were given that opportunity, and I got to work with one of the people that again was given placebo in phase 3. And so that was my, yeah, my experience, and I got to I think one of the best parts of that experience for me as a therapist was getting to be filmed and supervised in my psychedelic work. So they
Mm.
filmed our sessions for research purposes, but also for training purposes. And then my supervisor would go over them and watch me work
Mm.
and then give me like pointers and feedback. I learned, and I the last time I did that was in grad school, right? Like I that was what we did
Right.
at Columbia too, during our practicum. But that had been a long time since I had had that experience, and getting to have somebody watch me work was so good for me and was really validating. And also, I
Mm.
learned so much from my supervisor. I am like eternally grateful to this man for just being
Mm.
he's so skilled. He'd been involved in maps for a long time, and he's out in California, but he really he really taught me a lot about psychedelic therapy.
Beautiful.
Um,
Do you want to say
and
his name?
Joseph McGowan,
Mm.
McGowan, yeah, he works with maps. He was just an amazing supervisor. And if he ever listens to this, thanks. You made a big impact. I mean,
Yeah.
he knows,
Well,
but
I think that's really super valuable to be able to be witnessed by and get that kind of supervision. And it's pretty rare because it's kind of labor intensive and time intensive. And um, I would like to see more trainings where that is done in a real session with a real client. Maybe I guess there's ethical things and it's hard to organize, but it seems like that would be such a valuable thing. It's pretty rare.
yeah, yeah. So I feel very fortunate to have had that experience and to have had the supervisor that I did, and my co-therapist, who was also an amazing co-therapist. And it was a really wonderful experience. And
Yeah.
I think I learned more during that experience than I have at maybe most trainings I've been to postgraduate.
Amazing. Well, that's part of the beauty of the MAPS experiments, but also a place where they've been kind of criticized a little bit that you have two therapists for MDMA assisted therapy, which 6 to 8 hours. I mean, so it's just in terms of accessibility, like you were speaking to earlier, it's hard to find one therapist to do that with, let alone two. So
Yes, and in my experience, having two is better.
it's better. Yeah.
It's better. It's better for the therapist. I mean, it can be really exhausting.
I
And
guess we could imagine a world where there's more and more therapists offering this who are well trained and maybe more insurance or other financial support to make that accessible because it's obviously going to be expensive to hire two people.
insurance for sure. And then I think also, the ability of having a trainee and a
Oh
not,
yeah.
somebody, it sucks, but like I got paid very little on the study, and that's okay. I didn't get paid my normally hourly rate. But to have students or interns, people who are learning about this work, who need these hours to maybe be paid a little bit less or a lot less, but still paid, right? Paid for their time, not free labor, but paid less. That will also, I think, support a little bit more affordability, and then also having insurance companies cover this, because otherwise it's not going to
Yeah.
be accessible. Um,
Yeah. Well, on that topic, we don't have to go down this road, but I was talking with one of my people I'm working with is in school to become a therapist right now, and just the internship and how it's like looking back at my training to become a therapist, I spent something like 15 months at an addiction treatment center. I don't know, 20 hours a week or something, and like $0. And like, that's just not, at the time I was like happy and I was passionate about what I'm doing. But looking back on it, it's like, wow, it's hard for people economically to be able to do things like that. And why is it, I think we should advocate for paid internships and for paying more therapists who are helping, who are working.
Yeah, I think I made $30,000 at my first job, and I worked 7 days, 35 maybe. I worked 7 days in New York, and that was
Yeah,
when,
New York City.
yeah,
Stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and that was that, and I was working in therapeutic foster care.
hmm Yeah, I had a job right when I graduated in a home for people with severe mental health issues, and yeah, it's just a long process to become fully licensed, and there's that kind of, I guess, anyway. But why? Could you speak to the value of having two therapists instead of one for that?
Well, again, with MDMA, which is different than mushroom and ketamine work, with MDMA, your client, in our experience, they talk a lot. There's there's that component to MDMA work where there's a lot of verbal processing happening. It's not as though someone's laying there quietly during, I mean, it's possible, it definitely happens, but people aren't laying there quietly during their journey like they are during sometimes mushroom journeys, definitely during ketamine journeys, where you don't have to be interacting the entire time. And that person's on an amphetamine, right? MDMA has the amphetamine aspect to
Right.
it. So they can talk for 8 hours. But you're not on an amphetamine. And it's hard to talk for that long. And not only are you talking, you have to be harnessing your skills, your presence, your your own body, being grounded, being not leading. You have to be really careful not to lead, but also be present and helping and supportive. So there's a lot happening internally for you as a therapist, and that's mentally exhausting.
Mm.
And not physically, but mentally. And after 5 hours of that, you might need to stand up and stretch your legs and walk out, but that person might be deep in process, and you can't do that if it's just you.
Yeah.
So I lose I would lose sharpness if I wasn't able to say to my co-therapist, "Hey, I'm going to take a break and walk outside." Okay, great. And then they're supported. And then I go take a breath and walk outside, go get my son something to eat, get grounded and come back. And then my other therapist does the same thing. And we're both able to titrate the amount of time and attention and focus and mental sharpness that we need to maintain in order to observe ourselves. And that's the big thing that we're doing.
Mm.
We're observing this person, but we're really observing ourselves, because this psychedelic work is so different than regular therapy work. I'm not leading this person. This person is leading us with their inner healing intelligence at the helm. And I'm kind of supporting that process and being like a bumper to keep us aligned with that, but I'm not guiding that. And so that is a special skill in and of itself that takes years to develop. And I am not there. I'm developing it. I've been doing psychedelic therapy for years, but with MDMA, it's very important to watch not having a goal for this
Mm.
person's healing. And it's like your mind is looking at yourself and is looking at this person simultaneously. You have to watch yourself and be aware. And you also have to pay attention to their cues and their body language and their breaths and their words. And that is an exhausting mental process. And to do that for 8 hours by yourself, I mean, kudos to somebody who can do that. But I'm a daily meditator, and I still don't have the mental fortitude to be able to do that by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's well said. It makes so much sense. And you want to be providing that presence. So I think it does make sense to have two people, and that's so supportive.
We owe that to this
Yeah.
person. They're opening their hearts. They're under a substance, under the influence of a substance that is opening them up.
Yeah.
We owe it to them to be
Well, and
present.
yeah, the value of someone having that 6 to 8 hours with that level of attunement and support, and as they're opening so much and sharing so much, and then that can become a kind of bedrock for them of what that feels like, because you're not always going to get that in your normal life, but you can, it's like a huge, massive corrective experience, that reparenting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the other piece of the two therapists, is that mommy and daddy, it
Right.
doesn't have to be male and female. It's just the energies, right? Two people holding the frequencies of parents. And that can be a really corrective experience for clients who have attachment trauma, which, let's face it, who doesn't to some
Yeah.
extent. I mean, kudos to the people who are secure, who had really healthy attachment, but ultimately, even the healthiest of families, are people with great parents who are well intentioned and have all the resources in the world, still struggle with some attachment stuff. And so having two people to play those roles, or to step into those roles, and to have two present parents, that's like
Yeah, that's
healing in and of
huge.
itself.
I love that. Yeah. Well, I think this is a great conversation. It's giving people a real taste of the differences between MDMA, ketamine, and we haven't talked a lot about psilocybin, but they're all very different. And then I just want to speak briefly, not spend a lot of time on it, but I get so many questions about this. Right now, ketamine assisted therapy is fully legal, and that's an option for people seeking therapy. And MDMA and psilocybin are not fully legal. And there's research studies where they're being done legally, but you're not going to be able to find a legal psilocybin assisted therapist in Colorado, right? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so we're really close to you being able to find a mushroom therapist in your community. We are the governor's office is finalizing rules right now, with DORA, or for DORA, for the Department of Regulatory Agencies, to develop training programs and statutes that would allow delay any individual, no matter what educational background you have, high school diploma, that's it, to go and get a facilitator license to be able to facilitate mushroom sessions. Now, figuring out where the mushroom's coming from, I don't really know that much about that, right? Like, when you become a facilitator, where do you get the mushrooms to give to
Uh,
your client? Like, I don't know that. But I
you
will
just
say
you go
that,
to downtown Denver and ask around, right?
yeah, right. But that's the other thing, though, right? We're under this law is also the decrim component, which allows the average person to grow mushrooms if you want. Or if your neighbor's growing mushrooms, they can gift them to you. That's not
Hmm.
illegal. So there's this other way that somebody could get support from a therapist or from a person. I don't know about a therapist, but a person, is they could just have support services from a person. And under the decrim, somebody could go and get gifted mushrooms from a neighbor and then say to another friend, hey, would you hold space for me? And that person can do that, and nobody's going to get in trouble. So the decrim component is a bit vague in terms of what are support services. Can you hold space for somebody if you're a therapist, even if you don't give them the mushrooms? Is that okay? It's not clear
Hmm.
um, exactly where the decrim lines will begin and end, but we are really lucky that we have this decrim component in the law. I think that that's going to allow us to still have people be able to access mushrooms without having to go to a licensed facilitator or a licensed distributor to get mushrooms. You'll be able to still get it from your neighbor and choose to do it with a trusted friend or family member if that's what you choose to do. So there will be a lot of access in terms of you can grow your own, which is pretty simple and affordable, and it shouldn't limit access for people. The therapeutic aspect of it, getting the support with a therapist for things like bigger trauma needs or major struggles and mental health issues, that will be probably still difficult to access initially in terms of from a financial perspective, because it's not going to be federally legal. So insurance companies are not going to be able to cover this probably. At least in the beginning. So
Right.
for a
That'll take
licensed
time.
facilitator or a licensed therapist who's a facilitator to be able to hold space and to support somebody, that's probably going to be more expensive and difficult to access.
Yeah, it's coming, and there's a lot of people excited about it and getting in. Yeah, yeah, that was well said. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about elemental. What is it? Elemental Psychedelics, a woman-led center for training and education and all that. Do you want to speak to that? And you being a woman leader here.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Shannon Hughes and I, we are the co-founders of Elemental Psychedelics, and we really try to embody listening and being slow. We try to listen, not to lead, but to be led by something greater. And we spend a lot of energy letting go of thinking that we know where things are supposed to go, and directing the ship in a direction that we mentally have decided is where we want to go. And we really try to be receptive to what the moment is calling for, and to listen, and to be guided by something greater than us, but the needs of our community, or um, kind of just where time and space are going moment to moment, and be co-creative with our
Mm,
inner healing intelligence or our inner guidance, and follow a natural flow of things as they come. It's less about being headstrong and more about being led in a dance with the animate forces at play in our lives.
beautiful. Yeah. And you're offering, what kind of trainings are you offering with that?
We offer ketamine assisted psychotherapy training. So we have one in June coming up.
Okay.
We still have a few spots open for that. We also run like women's retreats for therapists that are wanting to learn about mushrooms, and we provide a little bit of education and community experience to bring people together, and also, I think, demonstrate how ritual and ceremony can be used in with groups in order to create psychedelic journeys.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And we
Yeah. I
have
know.
we have CAP consult groups too, so consultation groups that we run monthly. We do ecstatic dances. We really want to create
Oh,
opportunities for people who've come to our trainings to keep in community. So we have ecstatic dances. We have, virtual offerings. We have a mushrooms, myths and misconceptions coming up on March 6th, Thursday, March 6th.
oh,
We're doing
cool.
a webinar that's we have a sliding scale. It's super affordable for anybody who wants to come. I can send you the link.
Yeah.
Um, and so we're really just trying to create opportunities for people to come together in community. Our ecstatic dances are also sliding scale free of charge. As long as you've been to one of our trainings, you can come and you can bring a friend. I think our next one is in May. I'll send you the link on that one too.
Sure.
And so we're really trying to create opportunities for people to stay in community, not just come to a training once, but to
Mm,
keep coming to offerings that we create for, we're thinking about doing some song circles over the summer. So
mm.
just bring folks together who've done our trainings.
I love that. I'm a big fan of ecstatic dance. That's beautiful. And your trainings, some of them are more specifically for women, but some of them are for everyone. Everyone. Is that?
Yes, some of them
Yeah.
are for women, but yeah, our ketamine training is co-ed. Our ecstatic dances are co-ed. So we have space for people who identify as all genders.
Beautiful. Yeah. And Shannon Hughes was on this podcast. She's a great resource for all this stuff. Anything else you want to share about your work there and with Elemental or anything else?
I think what we really believe at Elemental is also that we want to help practitioners find their unique offering in this space. I think so many people are flocking to be psychedelic therapists. But what does that mean, and
Mm,
why? And how do we help people develop their unique brand or their unique offering in their community that helps the people that are really needing their help? Like, I believe that when we are in alignment with our what is ours to give or ours to offer, the people that are needing or seeking that offering find us. But if we're not able to be in alignment with it, what is ours uniquely to give from our highest self, then we fail to meet the needs of those in the community who are seeking what our medicine is.
mm,
So at Elemental, we don't want to make a one size fits all psychedelic therapist. We want to teach people how to find their unique way of doing medicine work, and to foster the creation of that offering.
I love that. Yeah. It's empowering. And it feels so true when you say that, and it's different than kind of the model that a lot of our society is based on of, I mean, we're not learning how to build a car here. We're, so it's like, it's not following 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. It's like, it's not so formulaic, right?
No, it's not. And I think the healing arts is a good term because it is
Mm,
art. It
Hmm.
is art. And the way that I do my work doesn't need to be the way that other people do their work. I mean, yes, there's also some structural boundaries, right? Ethics need to be abided by, and doing things in a way that supports the health and safety of your client and who's coming to you. Absolutely. That's like the masculine, that's the bedrock, right? That's the foundation, that's the container. But within the container gets to be the feminine, where we get to explore and flow and create and be flexible and create our own unique magical, as Dr. Heacock calls it, special sauce that's
Mm.
just uniquely yours to give. And so, with Elemental is really based on this belief of creating a strong container to then have a creative process of um, unique, authentic expression that comes forth from that container.
Beautiful. Yeah, makes so much sense. I think just culturally, our culture went to such an extreme place with denying our subjective experience at all, with behavioralism and with science and materialism, you know, and I think psychedelics in part are serving as a way to integrate and honor our subjective experience and our what's happening in our mind and our psyche and our consciousness, and making space for that. And it isn't art, and it is not as formulaic or not as cut and dry.
No, no, I've been doing this work for a long time, personally and professionally now. And there's nothing formulaic about it. No two sessions have ever been the same. If you had a structure that you need to follow, you would need to break it all the time, because the needs of each client are going to be so unique and so different. And you are going to need to be flexible and creative with how each person shows up and the unique needs of their journey experience. And if you're not able to, if you're so formulaic that you can't step out of that in order to meet this person where they're at and to support them, then you will fail you will fail in your desire to help people or to help that person.
Mm, yeah, I think that's a really important message to share with people. Well, beautiful. It's been so wonderful having you on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And I think this will be a really valuable conversation for a lot of people, honestly, because you spoke to a lot of questions that I will get, often about this kind of thing. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Any last words for us?
So you did have one question before we did this that I want to answer
Sure.
about, your question was how much of all the various healing modalities and theories are attempts to treat symptoms of a more broadly sick or toxic culture, and what would a truly healthy and living thriving society look like. And so maybe this is a good place to end.
Absolutely. Yeah.
um so you kind of the question of like the symptoms of a more broadly sick toxic culture. I think that that's mostly true. I think that we have a pretty unwell and toxic culture, but I also want to say that it is ours,
Mm. Hmm.
and it is us.
Mm.
Our culture is an expression of us. It is our shadow, and the sickness of our culture is an expression of our shadow and our needs. And it needs our compassionate attention, with the ability to grieve, like
Mm.
what this is telling us about ourselves and about how we've ended up here. It's an important part of our story, and I think it's an important part of ourselves that we integrate through grief work and through ownership. I think it's really easy to say like the society is broken and society is toxic. And there are some people at the top, and we can get into that. I don't want to right now, but we can also see it as an expression on a spiritual level and on an existential level of us as humans and how we've evolved. And it's part of all of our history that's brought us to where we are today. And how do we embrace the toxicity of our culture with through the lens and through the heart of grief work? Um, I don't know what healthy would look like, but I can say that I love Martin Pritchel's work. He wrote The Smell of Rain on Dust, and he
Mm.
says something about that if a society can't grieve, then that's a sign of them being unwell. I think
Mm.
grief is at the forefront of our ability to heal. And I also believe that in our ability to open our hearts with grief, we also open our hearts to what a new way of living could look like. I do think that Christopher M. I'm going to say his last name wrong. Bach. He wrote LSD in the Mind of the Universe. He talks about there being a great descent and a decline in our world, and it leading to a pretty dark potential ending, or not ending, but to a dark place. But he talks also about, from that place of despair and loss and ash rises a new heart-centered humanity. And I have no sense of timeline, obviously, and I have no sense of what that's going to look like. But I believe that grief and open-heartedness is at the bedrock of a healthy and thriving society.
Wow. I love that. That was a little surprising to me to hear you speak to grief, and I think that's needed. That's a good message, and to own our society, that's us, and not, oh, here's society over there, and I'm going to leave that to find healing somewhere else. Like, that's not going to help. That's not the way forward for us. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. And I'm not abandoning. Personally, I refuse to abandon the darkness that we see in the world.
Yeah, powerful. Well, let's hope that we can navigate these waters skillfully.
Yes, let's hope.
It does seem like things are going to be changing one way or the other, and hopefully we can create a healthier, happier world together.
Absolutely.
Well, beautiful. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. This was lovely. I loved our conversation, and it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you.